Ahoy! Welcome to the Sea Captain Way podcast with Phil Bender and Greg Patton, where we help listeners navigate the uncharted waters of personal and professional growth.
The Sea Captain Way is about energizing top performers to take on risks and push beyond their comfort zone to pursue life-changing goals and achieve peak performance.
We're going to help you build your vision by showing you how to break free of boundaries that are holding you back.
So Phil, today we're thrilled to welcome Vance Crowe to the Sea Captain Way podcast. Vance is the founder and owner of Legacy Interviews, a firm that provides clients with professionally recorded videos designed to capture life stories for future generations. Prior to founding his company, Vance's experience includes working as the Director of Millennial Engagement for Monsanto, serving as a Communications Strategist at the World Bank, and volunteering for the Peace Corp in Kenya. He has spoken before more than 300,000 live audience members with insights on how to engage critics, negotiate with employees, and deepen the relationships that matter most. So welcome, Vance Crowe, to the Sea Captain Way podcast.
Welcome, Vance Crowe. My gosh, we're going to have to be on our game today, because with somebody who has this level of depth in interviewing, I'm going to feel inadequate this entire podcast. Vance, this is going to be exciting and interesting and unique, I think, for all of our listeners because of the just the depth of this topic. So welcome. I'm glad you're here, and really looking forward to this.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. And just to give you a little context, Phil, so I met Vance, I think it was back in 2012. I was working at a digital marketing agency as a director of strategy, and Vance came in as a consultant, and very interesting to some of the conversations we have, I think all the way down to like when you're meeting with a prospect or a client, like where to, how to situate yourself at the table in proximity to where they are. And if, that kind of good stuff. And then I had mentioned to Lisa that it was the first time I heard the term Bitcoin. I think you did that engagement and they paid you in Bitcoin. And I'm like, what is going on here?
So that's quite an interesting topic. You probably could have helped Greg out during our pledgeship with some of the etiquette elements, but for a different time. So let's get started. So you left corporate world after 15 years, hung out your shingle 3 years ago. Tell us about your business legacy interviews. I'm very interested in this, and what inspired you to become an entrepreneur.
So Legacy Interviews started not, just like all good businesses, almost as an accident. I had left my job as the Director of Millennial Engagement for Monsanto. Actually, Bayer had bought the company at that point. And I was invited to give talks all around the country. But you guys know that you can't just come up with ideas on what should you talk about. You have to have new ideas. So I started a podcast, and this was just my vehicle to continually run into new and interesting people. One of my listeners one time said, "Hey, I'd love to drop a book off with you. Would you mind?" So at the time I was doing the podcast in my home studio. So he came by and he had his 6-year-old son with him. And as soon as his son heard my voice, his eyes get really big and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you're the guy on the radio." And so I was like, "Oh, you listen?" And he was like, "Yeah, with my dad in the truck." And I was like, "Well, would you like to do an interview?" And this kid pushed past me like before he even asked for dad. And so we sat down and did an interview. And here's this 6-year-old kid with his little legs hanging off the chair. I have the lights and the camera on, and I'm asking him questions in an interview, but like what a 6-year-old could answer. So I'm asking him, "What do you think your dad does all day at work? What do you wish mom let you eat more of? Tell me about your best friend."
Important stuff.
We had a great conversation, and this kid took it like he was on Meet the Press.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then I sent it to his dad. And his dad was really happy and grateful. And then a few weeks later, he called me up and he said, "Hey, I was at a party the other night and we were talking about if your house were on fire and you could only grab one thing, what would it be?" He said, "I knew instantly it was the interview you did with my son, because I can't go back and get it again. And if I had asked him those questions, he wouldn't have answered them the same way. And I think that that's important." So he's like, "I don't know what you should do with this, but you should do something." So I went out on my podcast. It was a few weeks before Christmas, and said, "If there's anybody that wants me to interview your loved ones as a Christmas gift, let me know." I thought I'd get 2 or 3. In fact, I got so many I couldn't get them all done. And that's when I realized there's a real need here. And so I became an entrepreneur almost by accident.
Whoa. Well, geez, that was worth the whole thing by
I
itself right
know.
there, right?
Big gun right out of the gate.
Oh, I'm thinking about 20 of them already. 20 people that I'd like to keep in that. You know, it's interesting you go down this path because there are people, and Greg, you don't even know this. There's a few people that I was very happy, to be friends with that have passed on, but they had text voicemail messages with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm having the toughest time letting those go.
Yeah.
Because, one of the first things I think in the grieving process, one of the first thing is forgetting how that person sounded.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Not just you
Mm-hmm.
forget about you remember them, but you don't remember their voice.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's really interesting. A great way to start this off.
So, Vance, you're a highly sought after public speaker across the US and in Canada. You give keynotes on an interesting range of topics for organizations and at conferences. One of your keynote addresses is titled Surfing the Edge of Chaos. And it relates to how cultural changes and what organizations can do to navigate this dynamic. What are some of the areas you cover when you give this keynote speech?
So Surfing the Edge of Chaos is a title I came up with when everybody would give me a hard time, even in the mainstream media, about, oh, you're the Director of Millennial Engagement. So if I'm a millennial, are you trying to engage me? And I think like that's a fair question, right? But I actually kept the job title because it made people underestimate me. And it was a really powerful thing because they would think, oh, here comes a joker. We're going to be able to make him look silly. And what I would do is go out and give talks. And I used to always say that I specifically selected for places where the people wouldn't have positive feelings about Monsanto, because this is where you could go and do the most change in culture. And what I decided I would talk with people about is, how does culture change? How is it that you know what you know? And one of the things that happens with a term like Monsanto is when you say I work at Monsanto, people immediately have a reaction to it, right? This name has real power. But what I discovered over time is when people found out that I worked at Monsanto at, say, like a party or something, what happens next is they look over their left shoulder and then they look over their right shoulder. And then they say, I don't have a problem with Monsanto, but I got a friend that thinks this.
Yeah, right.
And what that showed me was so much of what we think of as common knowledge or what everybody knows is just kind of what we've heard. So I used to give this talk about how is it that ideas spread and how do they change what you think and what does it take to change someone's mind. And so I only spent maybe 10% of the time talking about agriculture or GMOs or pesticides, but really just talking about how minds change. And then people were much more open to what is it that I have to say, because they've been primed to think about what is it that I actually know. How is it that I should think about these things? So that talk was born out of that. And now I use it to help people understand, how does culture change?
Yeah. And this is, I mean, no better example than when I used to, Greg, back in the day, worked for United Way. And I was a torchlighter and I used to go present at companies. And you would have people that were giving and they would talk about something. This is 1980s, by the way, late 80s. And they're talking about something that happened in World War II, where the United Way, the Red Cross was part of the United Way, and they shunned some people or whatever. It was just it was an interesting thing, but they have those beliefs and those understandings that they carry. So when they share that out to you and you're able to help them through it, it's very valuable, and it can, because this type of stuff can really affect a culture. So you have a upcoming series of workshops you're conducting about interest-based communication for the workplace. Tell us about these workshops and who they're designed for and how you hope that people, what will be the takeaways that some of these people will take from this event?
So a lot of times I'm invited to give talks on really specific subjects like negotiations or conflict resolution. And over time, I've developed basically a philosophy about how to have professional interactions with other people. The basis of that philosophy is interest-based negotiations, which is from that famous book, Getting to Yes. The entire concept is about what is it that other people need and want, and how is it that you can show them, hey, if you give me what I need and want, I can help you get what you need and want. And once you have that as a foundation, now you can start layering on other attributes of professional communication. And I think for a lot of people that have approached me to do these classes, I was approached by a biotech company that had several young scientists in their 20s and 30s, and the owner saying, "Hey, I need these people to be able to make a memorable pitch. They need to be able to talk about our company in a way that reflects well on us. I need them to be able to have conflict and disagreement with one another. I need them to show that they are interested in other people. So they need to be able to ask good questions and stay engaged and not be inverted into themselves." So what I did was I took this class and I made one with the basis of interest-based negotiating, and then everything else about the way you communicate based on what is it that other people need to know in order to trust you, in order to find common interests with you, and in order to resolve either your conflicts or find opportunities to work on. So we created this for a biotech company. As other people heard me talking about it, they said, "Hey, we want to send some people too." And so it's another one of those things where I go where things grow. And this is another one of those things where it's growing quickly.
I love it. I love it. What a cool position to be in. What a great opportunity that you're engaged in. This is very, very interesting. And so wow,
Yeah.
I'm just enlightened by all this. This is wonderful.
Yeah. So I had mentioned to, and this was going to kind of the question that I have is I do want to kind of keep going on the conflict theme, because when Vance mentioned, I knew he went to Monsanto, and then I saw, I think on LinkedIn, you were going to the South by Southwest conference. I'm like, oh my God, that is, you couldn't pay me enough to sit in that. That just must have been like game on. And Vance, you seems like you kind of like to spar, or you keep, you don't back down from, engaging someone. So part of your job when you were at Monsanto was looking for ways to resolve conflict between, I guess it was modern agriculture and popular culture was the way you put it. And a lot of this involved trying to use conflict resolution techniques between your employer and its critics. And you had mentioned when we spoke before the podcast that a lot of people would come to your presentations and hope you would fail. And then afterwards, they would end up, coming up and shaking your hand and thanking you for your time. So how were you able to take on and succeed in this kind of a challenge, this role that's not for the faint of heart, I would imagine?
Well, I don't actually know that I like sparring. I do really like the idea of having somebody come in with their arms crossed and then them leaving being really relaxed. I mean, what feeling is greater than that, to take somebody that goes from being your adversary to being somebody that you're comfortable with? And I think the biggest trick that I learned, and anybody can use this, I'm sure you guys know this really, really well, but it is a fascinating thing. If somebody comes to you with a strong opinion, you should let them tell you that opinion. You should let them express it in whatever way they need to. Don't correct them, listen. And then when they're done, instead of responding to them, you just repeat back exactly what you heard them say. And most people have gone most of their lives that nobody ever listens to them. And when somebody is really worked up and upset, if you just tell them, "Hey, let me see if I'm getting this correct. This is how you feel about GMOs, or this is what you're worried about with pesticides. Is that right?" And they'll go and they'll be like, "Well, yeah, that is what I think." And then if you, instead of popping in with your response, you say, "Well, is there more?" And they tell you more. Eventually, if they keep going, they will eventually run out of all that emotional energy. Everything will be expressed. They will feel like you heard them. And now a new conversation can begin. And this was something that I turned into a full business. I've done it all over the world. And it is the simplest thing that anybody can do. Just mirror people and watch what happens.
Craig, you have to be laughing.
I did not coach him up on that before. It's astonishing, that answer. Knowing you.
Well, this is the fundamental basis. My dear friend and coach, Dr. Paul Donahue, spent time with me. I worked with a listening based coach for 15 years, all based upon one premise. And that was that a couple of employees one time told me that I was a great connector, but a terrible listener. And I thought I was a great listener. At least all my girlfriends that wouldn't date me back, or all the girls that wouldn't date me back in high school, always told me I was a good listener, but they just wouldn't date. But my point is that Dr. Paul Donahue talked about this specific piece. Now, the one piece that I always add into that Vance, I'm sure you know, is that you not only share what you heard, but you share a feeling they might be having as they're expressing it. And that piece is very powerful, because I could understand, you could say things like, I can only imagine how you feel here. Mm-hmm. You must feel very frustrated in this. And so that ability, so I'm laughing. I saw Greg smile, because
it's incredible.
This is exactly what the foundation of the Sea Captain brand.
Right in Phil's wheelhouse. That was a pipe shot, or whatever the pitchers call that, with the All-Star game, going to let you hit a home run.
Right. Well, that's you endear yourself to me right there, just by having that extra step, that extra piece that most people know, but just can't execute on. And great for spouses as well. You learned in the Peace Corps, or you joined the Peace Corps, excuse me, in Kenya after you graduated from college. So we're going back a little bit here. Can you share what that experience was like for us, and how this journey continues to influence your personal and professional life?
When I was invited to join the Peace Corps, my mother is fond of telling everybody the story that they tested my Spanish knowledge that I studied in college, and they decided, we probably ought to send him to Kenya. And when I got the papers to go to Kenya, I was actually horribly disappointed. And this actually shows my naivety. And it's because in my mind, Kenya was the Switzerland of Africa. That's where people went for safari. I had known people that had gone on fancy trips there. So I thought, I was trying to join the Peace Corps to go help poor people. There aren't going to be any poor people there. Well, you get off the plane in Nairobi, and all of those silly, naive ideas are totally shot out of you. And you realize, no, this is actually an incredibly poor place. And my training was done where I live with a small family, where we had to use an outhouse. We did bucket baths. There was electricity only came in through a car battery that you would hook up to a TV or a light. And that car battery was charged if you walked about 2.5 miles to get it charged off of a generator. So in the time I was there, I really got to see just how much modern civilization improves every single moment of your life. And one of the biggest ones would be justice. I saw what happens in a culture when people are afraid, when they have thieving happening in their community, and what do they do to stop it? And I got to see what mob action actually looks like. And this changed my life rather dramatically, because I started to realize that the most dangerous force on earth is a human mob. And the only thing you can do to stop a mob is to stop it before it begins, by helping people have individual agency, to help them understand I don't need the group to go along with, and that that their own individual thoughts is the only thing that will keep us from being swept up into a mob, whether you're living in a small village in Africa or if you're living in the United States. It's so easy to get swept up into the mob that that you must be aware of it.
Wow. Well, that's powerful. And what keeps going through my mind as you're sharing all this is, and I guess what I want to ask you is, when did you feel this way about doing that? Because you're very servant minded as you're operating. Okay. And you seem to really have built a program around that servant leadership layer. Was this something that you knew early on? How did that start for you?
I was the middle child of 7 kids, and
the peacemaker.
Yeah, well, the peacemaker, or the guy that just knew he didn't have the skills that my siblings had. I could look around and say they're smarter than me, they're better looking, they're faster, they're better athlete. And so I realized by watching my father that curiosity was a superpower. And the more that you could be curious about the world around you, the more you could be interested in other people, the more doors opened up. And I think that put me in a position that you're describing of being in that serving position. And that goes along with what you were saying before. I mean, we really do need to listen to others. And when you do, it is so powerful that they're going to be way more interested in hearing you. If you go to live in another place, those people are going to be interested in where you come from. And so I think I just found that my superpower of being curious opened up doors that I couldn't have opened on my own with my other skills.
Oh, that's great. I just had an inspiration today, Greg, before you asked the final question. I had an inspiration today. I was with one of our coaches and we're having a conversation, and he said to me, talked about self-awareness, but he said it, and it I don't know if it was the audio or what, but it sounded like he said stealth awareness. And I went, oh man, did you just say stealth awareness? He said, no, I said self-awareness. I said, no, from here on out, call it stealth awareness, because that's what I'm hearing from you, Vance, is that you have this awareness that is almost stealth. It's like people who are with you don't realize that you're spending that time really understanding them, and they can't get enough of it. Right. And all these different layers. And it probably is how you survived at home, middle of 7, got to find your way. But but that's really impressive. And I think I'm announcing it right now in Sea Captain Way that's, I think, my next book is Stealth Awareness.
Oh,
so Greg, let's put a bow on this thing.
I did have one more for you, Vance. So you actually have 2 podcasts that you do. And your guests have included economists, U.S. senators, farmers, ambassadors, and a sex worker.
Hello.
You got us there. So what was your motivation for starting a podcast, and what's your favorite part of doing the interviews?
Yeah, as I said in the beginning, I use the podcast as a vehicle to have really amazing people sit down and talk with me. And as you guys know, you can often get way out of your league by just asking somebody, hey, will you sit down and talk? And so I did it because I needed to have new ideas. I needed to be constantly pushing myself. And the podcast has been everything that I thought it could be and so much more. I just recently launched a new podcast called the Ag Tribes Report, which is a podcast about the culture of agriculture and what is the news that's important to them. In ag, you can go out and get commodity prices, weather reports, all the different things that are like the nuts and bolts of the business. But there's very few people talking about, hey, did you know that 70 horses were accidentally poisoned down in Oklahoma, and this is going to devastate the rodeo industry? And oh, by the way, did you know there's a company trying to heavily influence the farm bill? And so for people living in the city, this may not be very important to you, but the people living in agriculture, this is a wide survey. And the reason I call it the Ag Tribes is each week I have a different co-host. So last week I had a dairy farmer from Washington State. I'll have a cattle rancher on from Arizona. Next week I'll have a person from Maine growing cranberries. So we're trying to figure out all the different ag tribes that make up ag and what is the news that impacts their culture.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. How about that?
All those different perspectives. You don't look like an ag guy, when I see you. So my ex-wife was from West Texas, and we would go down there once a year, and we saw the movie. I remember my kids were little. We went to see the movie City Slickers. I don't know if you guys ever saw that movie. And the final, triumphant
one thing, right?
Yeah. Well, the final triumphant scene in the movie, I mean, there were people in the theater wearing cowboy hats and the whole cowboy, but the whole deal. The triumphant scene in the movie is Bruno Kirby, whoever pulls the pin, and they let all of these horses go, free, or cattle or whatever it was. I don't remember. The movie ended, and all the other theaters in America, these people were furious. It was like, that is the stupidest. I was like, holy cow! I didn't think about the different geography and all, impact that could have.
It wrecked the movie for them. So, right.
We ready to wrap?
Let's wrap it. Vance, how do people contact you if they want to learn about more about what you do, booking you for a speaking engagement or conducting a customized workshop?
So these are great questions. I really had fun talking with you guys. If people are interested in legacy interviews, they can just go to legacyinterviews.com. And if you're interested in learning more about the communications classes or some of the speeches I give, you can just find me at vancecrowe.com, and that's Crow with an E.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I tell you what, Greg, again, masterful job putting all this together. Thank you. Vance, what a pleasure. Nice to know you and know what you're all about. And if you're not the best looking person in your family, then you got a damn good looking family. Let's put it that way. I thought I'd go there before Greg. Any other thoughts, Greg, before we go?
No, I'm not going to top that one. Awesome. It was great chatting, Vance.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Sea Captain Way podcast. If you found the conversation valuable, please like, share, and post a review on your favorite podcast app.
To learn more about Sea Captain and its performance coaching programs, visit us at seacaptaincoaching.com. The link is in the show notes. You can also follow us at Sea Captain Coaching on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening.
Wishing you fair winds and a following sea on your journey.